Well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you, chaplains, for giving us, me and Lauren, the opportunity to share some very, very critical information with you. Again, Sam said that some of this may be familiar, but we are bringing you information from the perspective of a law enforcement officer and a clinician. So we hope and we believe that there's going to be a lot here that you may not have been exposed to, but that you will be able to use in your work with the various public safety agencies and services that you work with. So I'm going to kick it over to Lauren real quick and let her introduce herself. I'll finish up and then we'll get into the presentation.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Lauren Moose. I'm a forensic nurse examiner with the McLeod Health Program here in Florence. I have been a nurse since 2013, and I was an operating room nurse. And then in January of 21, I became a forensic nurse examiner. I've worked with all ages, 0 to 100. I am SANE certified in pediatrics, adolescents, and adults. And as I said, I'm with the McLeod program here in Florence, and we service the entire PD region. We also service 24/7, 365 days. We have our primary location at the McLeod Hospital in Florence, and then we also have a satellite location in Carolina Forest for any victims of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, sexual assault, sexual abuse, human trafficking, or non-lethal strangulation. We can care for the Horry County patients at Carolina Forest, as well as the remaining patients at the office in McLeod. We also have telesane services for our McLeod ERs in Sherrill, Clarendon, and Dillon. So we've expanded to cover the entire region. At the end of the presentation, we'll offer some contacts for you for your region, for the programs that exist in your region of forensic nurse examiners as well. And today, my information that I'll be passing along to you guys is based on my training as well as my experience with my patients.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. So my name is Brian Bennett. I am a retired state law enforcement officer. I retired about a year and a half ago as a senior instructor at the State Police Academy, where for 16 years of my career, I was the instructor in domestic violence for the state of South Carolina, among other things like vulnerable adult and elder abuse and strangulation assaults. I'm a 1997 graduate of the University of South Carolina and worked for a number of law enforcement agencies before teaching at the State Police Academy. Since retiring, I founded a training and consulting company called Clearview Justice Training and Consulting, both while I was active law enforcement and since retirement. I train all professions, all businesses and corporations who have an interest in knowing more about interpersonal violence, again, elder abuse, strangulation assaults. And I am very, very active in legislative work in South Carolina, trying to get some laws passed to address a number of the issues that we're going to talk about today. So I'm excited about what we're going to present to you. And again, at the end, after we stop the recording, we'll have a question and answer session so that we can answer any questions. So please, as we're going along, write down your questions so you don't forget, and we'll get those addressed at the end. So thank you very much. So just want to reemphasize, there can be some legal implications with your position being a chaplain, regardless of what public safety organization you happen to be with at the time. The fact of the matter is that you can be put in a position where you may be a witness without wanting to be, and that may necessitate you testifying in some type of civil or criminal court. From the law enforcement perspective, I would suggest that if you ever have a law enforcement officer prompt you or ask you to ask questions of a victim or a suspect on their behalf, politely decline to do so. Because that can complicate some legal matters in court. You aren't an agent of law enforcement. It's not your job to investigate criminally. That's their job. And acting on a law enforcement officer's behalf can just cause some legal problems in court. So just want you to be aware of that. So a rhetorical question for you for the group to think about is, what scenes, locations, or incidents might you discover a domestic violence situation? Sam already referred to one like a motor vehicle collision. I've responded to single motor vehicle collision, single car, multiple car, where the whole reason for the collision was some type of rolling domestic, as we call it, where there's an assault or an escape attempt that took place while the car was driving down the road. You might be at a fire scene, at a residence, or anywhere else where that fire had something to do with the domestic situation or the violence in that type of situation. Could be, a paramedic or EMT. Commonly, domestic violence situations may not reach out or be dispatched to law enforcement services. It may be a medical necessity call where paramedics or EMTs or first responders show up, and there opens the door to pick up on some of the things we're going to talk about today. So before we get started, I want to give you a little test. Probably didn't think you were going to get one, but just take a look and do your best. So the answer is 13, but there's something more. You watch from the right side of your screen towards the left, you'll see a guy in a bear costume make his way through the group. So if you miss the bear, that is normal. But the point here is it's easy to miss something that you're not looking for. Individuals of all types, all professions, do not inherently know what to look for or what to ask until they get training or some type of exposure. Myself, and I'm sure Lauren can speak from the same way, as when we went through our training and we got our experience, our ability to see things got better, our ability to hear things got better, and our ability to inquire got better with exposure and training. And this is part of what today is. Here's our objectives. We've got a lot to go through, but we're going to get it all done and give you some good information. We're going to talk about some mechanics of coercive control, understanding the facade that some victims present to people that they're around. We're going to talk about the national story of the Gabby Petito encounter out of Utah, and we're going to actually watch some video there and break it down to pick up on some of these subtleties in a more realistic and responsive way. We're going to talk about trauma and communication, which then goes into trauma-informed interviewing techniques. We're going to talk about some of the red flags where you can identify patterns of behavior in perhaps victims and suspects. We're going to finish up with advice and empowerment to the people that you are interacting with, and we're going to conclude with some resources and advice. I want to address some terminology in a clinical setting, or a clinician may refer to a domestic abuse target as a patient, because in that setting, that is how they're defined. In law enforcement, like myself, we define them as victims because the law defines them as victims. In society, may use either one of those terms, or the victim, but they also may say the abused or the survivor. Our choice to use victim and patient is not to diminish their experience, their trauma, or the terror that they went through. It is simply the definition mechanism, the vernacular that we use within our profession. So when we use these terms, patient or victim, we're talking about the person who's the target of domestic violence. Okay. And the last thing is, you may see an abbreviation or the terminology NLS or NFS, which means non-lethal strangulation or non-fatal strangulation, interchangeably. We have both those terms in the clinical and the law enforcement area. So why subtlety matters? Although many people associate physical injuries as a sign of domestic violence, they're often the last sign. There's usually a lot of other things that have preceded the physical signs that you may see. And there's a lot of instances where something physical could have occurred, but still it still doesn't cause external signs of injury, such as strangulations. Myself and Lauren are very well versed in strangulation assaults, but I'm going to let her take the wheel on this one and talk about some of the invisible nature of those type of injuries.
Thank you, Brian. So strangulation is a very misunderstood act of violence. Most responders to the scene, as well as some of our ER physicians have, these are things that we've heard from them. They'll say, oh, well, they disclosed that they were strangled, but there's no marks, there's no bruise. They're walking, they're talking, they're fine. And the fact of the matter is that in 50% of strangulations, those patients have no visible external injuries whatsoever. We've had a majority of our patients that come in that have disclosed strangulation. They have no marks, they have no bruises. And that's true for any skin tone, from the lightest of skin tones to the darkest of skin tones. And that's because we all mark and bruise in different time frames. It can take up to 24 hours usually for a bruise to begin to form. I had a patient come in one time. She had a small triangle of purple behind her ear. And by the time I discharged her 6 or 7 hours later, it spanned the width of her neck and all the way up into her hairline. So immediately after an incident, looking for injuries to the neck after a strangulation disclosure is kind of a moot point, because there's a chance they're never going to have a mark, but there's also a chance it's going to take a little longer. But more importantly, the lethality of strangulation comes from the internal damage. And part of the reason why we might not see marks on the outside is because it doesn't take a lot of pressure to damage the internal carotids and jugulars and cause what will ultimately and possibly kill the patient. Um, we have our carotids that sit internal, and the jugulars sit just outside of those, closer to the skin surface. We can occlude the jugular with only 4.4 pounds of pressure. If we apply another 6 pounds, so take it up to about 11 pounds, we can then occlude the carotids. So when we occlude those, we're now preventing oxygenated blood from getting to the brain. And we're also preventing that deoxygenated blood from exiting the brain and draining back down towards the heart. So 10 seconds of that occlusion with that amount of pressure, 11 pounds, remember that number, we can render someone unconscious in about 10 seconds. At about 15 seconds of that applied pressure, they will more than likely have an anoxic seizure. And then if we maintain that pressure for about 157 seconds, 2.5 minutes, we can kill them. After about a minute, we call that the point of no return. Their respirations may begin to cease. If they survive, if the pressure is let up and they wake back up, they're guaranteed they're going to have some kind of a cognition deficit because of that lack of oxygen to their brain and the brain tissue death that they've experienced. So 11 pounds of pressure for about 2.5 minutes can basically kill someone. If any of y'all are drinking canned drinks today, it took you about 20 pounds of pressure to crack that can open. So only half of the amount of what it took you to crack open a Diet Coke, and you can render someone unconscious and eventually kill them. So that's why we don't necessarily see strangulation death at the hands of some big burly individual. A smaller individual can render a larger individual unconscious and or kill them simply with 11 pounds of pressure. And that amount of pressure doesn't necessarily cause enough to cause bruising to the neck. So that's why we're not always going to see marks. What we might see, though, is if the patient is struggling while that hand is around their neck, then that internal friction can cause a rupture in the carotids. And there's the other danger that lies within strangulation. That carotid will clot off just like any other blood vessel will. And that clot is not guaranteed to stay in place and stay healed for the remainder of their life. Days, weeks, months, years down the line, that clot can dislodge and end up traveling to their brain and cause an embolism and or a stroke. So the lethality is two parts. Either they can die on the scene from lack of oxygen, or if they survive, they may have that clot that can throw later on and cause either a stroke or death. So that's why it's very important for these patients to be sent from the scene to a medical facility so that they can get the appropriate imaging to make sure that that internal damage has not occurred. Also, we may see, if we do see injuries, it might be scratches from where the victim or the patient was trying to scratch at the hands and pull the hands away. We may then see injuries on the reported assailant. We might see scratches on their forearms. But again, that's not a guarantee, and that's not automatic. And that also falls under the neurobiology of trauma and how we respond when we are the person on the receiving end of violence. And I'll get into that a little bit later with a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Lauren. Part of your role as a professional, again, is raising your level of awareness. But aside from the physical injuries that you may look for, there's also cracks in people's behavior, how they stand, the words that they choose, how they choose to communicate. And it's your job and our jobs to also look for these little cracks in the facade that they put forward. And we're going to cover this in more detail later, but it's not just what you can see, it's the nonverbal communication, the non-visible things that we're going to emphasize today as well. Just to wrap up an idea about strangulation, strangulation is the #1 indicator of a future homicide. Oftentimes, individuals, rightly so, think of the targeted domestic violence victim as being the one who was killed. But I want you all to be aware is that the national research and the national studies show that people who use strangulation against another person are demonstrating a homicidal mindset. These are the individuals that are most likely to kill our law enforcement officers. These are the individuals that are most likely to create mass shootings, and we have data and research to back that up. But I also want you to understand it's not just the public safety professionals, but it could be anyone that's around the situation, friends, family, bystanders who try to intervene in these situations could find themselves at risk from someone who has demonstrated strangulation and a homicidal mindset. Um, and as you see that right there, there's a 750% increase of homicide by an abuser after one non-lethal strangulation event. And we're talking about, again, primarily domestic violence victims. So that is an extraordinarily high percentage. And some more studies have come out over the years that indicate that that number is likely higher than 750%, but likely around the 800 to 1,000% increase. So it's a huge, huge danger factor when we pick up on these subtleties. So another question for you. In what ways can an abuser control another person? Think about ways beyond the physical. Well, some of the things that can happen is financial control. Domestic violence does not respect the socioeconomic and economic status of a person. Rich or poor, great side of town, bad side of town. When someone who needs money doesn't have money or access to that money, it reduces options and it reduces safety. Money is power, money is influence, money is options. And so when money isn't accessed in whatever way, uh, the limits of choices are very, very clear. A spiritual faith-based control could also be a component of intimate partner relationships where the beliefs and the tenets of whatever religion or traditions are maximized and are reinforced. And some people in society get very put off by the fact that maybe someone didn't leave a relationship when they should have, but sometimes the tenets of someone's faith and their religious center overrides their personal protection interest. And sometimes we see that happen. And also there's a reinforcement of traditional gender roles where the male is the protector, the guider, the steerer of the
Head of the
ship, if you
household.
will. Yeah. Um, and we see that as well. You got some comments on that, Lauren?
Well, no, I was just saying that those traditional gender roles, when the man is considered the head of the household, those types of beliefs, then the if the female is the victim, then a lot of times they just chalk it up to, he's the one in charge and he gets to do whatever he wants. And so a lot of times that influences whether or not they attempt to get any help and try to leave the situation because they believe that that's just what's expected.
Right. An isolation strategy is one that's also used where the abuser will do whatever they can to separate the targeted person from their support network of friends and family. Friends and family generally will speak up and tell an abused person that things aren't right. Well, that's not what the abuser wants. And if the abused person tries to leave, friends or family are usually the ones to offer that respite or that support. Um, Abusers make victims of abuse make them make choices. Like if you care for me, and you care for me like you should, you will choose me over your friends or family. And in situations where friends and family have offered support, but the abused person goes back to the abuser, that's also incredibly frustrating. On another day and time, we can talk about why a victim would act against their own interest. But sometimes friends and family just simply get tired of offering support just to have the abused person go back to the abuser. And that just falls right into the pattern of the isolation strategy that the abuser wants. And then any type of limiting of communication. Who are you talking to? What are you talking to them about? How long are you talking to them? Whether it's, in person, in phone, or through some type of electronic means. Um, and this sets up this scenario where the abuser is the only one that's communicating what they want to be shown. The facade of truth is only coming from the abuser, and the victim is not able to provide any insight to the closest of people, whether it's friends, family, or otherwise. So this facade, victims put on this facade for various different means, and primarily it's a self-protective measure, but many people don't understand it. The putting on an air of normalcy is exhausting. And Lauren, can you explain some more detail about that?
Sure. I always say these patients, they live on high alert, and much like our combat veterans with PTSD are constantly on high alert, so are our domestic violence patients. Um, when our amygdala, which is our alarm, and again, I'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the neurobiology of trauma, when it goes off so many times, whether it be because of physical violence, psychological, verbal violence, it eventually it doesn't shut itself all the way off. And that's what we see in a lot of those combat veterans that have PTSD and our DV patients. That amygdala, it stays on. It goes from 11 to maybe like a 2, and it stays at 2. It never goes back to 0 completely. And so that constant looking over the shoulder, waiting for the shoe to drop, living in the tension phase of the cycle of violence, after a while, it gets exhausting for these patients. Maintaining that everything is great and trying so hard to sell that their relationship is fine and nothing's wrong, putting up that act and having all of that going on internally and emotionally. We've had patients that just they hit their wall and they'll be with us, and I've literally had a patient say, I'm done. If he kills me, he kills me. I'm tired of doing all of this. I'm tired of having to watch over my shoulder. I'm tired of having to keep an eye out or listen for his tone that I know means that something's about to start. And they just, like I said, they get exhausted by it. And when they're starting to get close to that wall, that's when we may start to see those cracks start to form. We might start to see them slip and allow a little bit of the reality to be seen or be spoken out loud.
Yeah. Victims will actively try to hide the truth out of fear, embarrassment, or shame. Many of them think outside of themselves and how other people would view them. And we also see instances where uh, drugs and alcohol, either illicit, over the counter type stuff, are being used to manage the stress and trauma that they're going through. And obviously, if someone is inebriated or intoxicated, they may act out in some way that is maybe aggressive. That falls right into what an abuser wants, and pointing out that the abuser, like, I'm not the one that's the problem here. Look at what they're causing in this situation, when the truth could actually be different. Victims often use drugs or alcohol in these situations. And you may not know what their normal is. We'll get to that in just a minute. But when when those that are abused are putting on this facade, it's not because they care about the abuser necessarily. They're doing it as a self-protective survival instinct measure. So let's go into the Gabby Petito encounter. So many of you are familiar with this case that happened out of Utah where Gabby was ultimately found deceased. She was murdered by Brian, her boyfriend. There was a lot of criticism that came out of this with how law enforcement responded to it. We've taken some body camera video footage and edited it down to point out some of the subtle things that many people missed, but in society, but professionals picked up on. And so we're going to go through this step by step. One of those is the saying I'm fine while visibly distraught, downplaying some severity of the situation. Let's take a look.
Gabby, Brian, okay. What's going on? How come you're crying?
I'm sorry, we've just been fighting this morning. Some personal issues.
It was a long day. We were camping yesterday and camping got stuff, flies and stuff. I'm sorry I hit the bump there.
I was distracting him from driving. I'm sorry.
Okay, let's stop right there for a minute. So the reason that they've been pulled over is that law enforcement was contacted by witnesses that said they saw a couple fighting out in front of a store, running up and down a sidewalk and putting their hands on each other. There's also been some indications a witness stated that the male had his hands on the girl's face or around her neck. Now, at this initial point of contact, she is saying that she was, contributing to some distracted driving, and Brian in the driver's seat is talking about apologizing for hitting a curb. He knows why they're being pulled over. It wasn't because he hit a curb. And so right now is starting this pattern of laying out that things are okay when they're really not.
Can I get you to step out of the vehicle for me, man?
Yeah.
Just hang tight right there. Do you mind if I take your keys and just put them on your hood?
You got it, buddy. I'm so
Thank
sorry.
you. Oh, no, you're fine. I'm going to go ahead and close your door, okay? Why don't you come over here? SO229, I have the female that was on the passenger seat separated from me.
Okay, so I want you to start to look at her body behavior and her words. Her attitude, her body posture, and her expressions have already changed now that she's out of the car and separated to some degree from Brian. But again, watch her behaviors and listen to what she says.
Male, keys are on the hood. You want to tell me what's going on?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just some days I have really bad OCD, and I was just cleaning and straightening up back of the van before, and I was apologizing to him and saying, I'm sorry that I'm so mean, because sometimes I have OCD and sometimes I just get really frustrated. Not like mean towards him, I guess my vibe is like I hear him like in a bad mood. And I was just saying, I'm sorry if I'm in a bad mood. I've just been really stressed. I had so much work I was doing on my computer this morning.
What do you do for a living?
Okay, so she's expressed, I have OCD. I was trying to apologize to him. You see her kind of wringing her hands, pacing back and forth. She's already laying out that the idea that she's been the cause of this because she has OCD and can be a little bit difficult to deal with.
Well, I hate to work at an organic juice bar, but I just quit my job.
Okay.
I was a nutritionist. That's
Oh,
what
okay.
that's my
That's
job.
cool.
And I just quit my job to travel across the country, and I'm trying to start a blog. I just have a lot of stuff. So I've been building my website. So I've just been really stressed, and he doesn't really believe that I could do any of it. So that's kind of been like a.
Okay, right here, she's done this twice where she's bending over. What she's trying to do is she's trying to self-soothe and calm herself. You might see this with athletes when they get exhausted, not necessarily when they get exhausted, but when they're getting prepped for their competition or in the middle of their competition. But you also see this with people under stress who are trying to self-soothe. And so this body posture of leaning forward, holding her waist, almost trying to, not almost, but trying to catch her breath, because she realizes that what she's saying and what her body is expressing are two different things. And it's my belief that she's trying to minimize her body's nonverbal communication.
I don't know. He's like down there. I don't know. We've just been fighting all morning, and he wouldn't let me in the car before. And then
Why wouldn't he let you in the car? Because
he
of
told me
your OCD?
he told me I needed to calm down. Yeah, but I'm perfectly calm. I'm calm all the time, and
She just said a word, I'm perfectly calm all the time. Obviously, what we see here does not match at all. So again, what she's saying and what we're seeing, there's an inconsistency.
he really stresses me out, and this is a rough morning.
Well, why don't we do this? Why don't I sit you down in the back seat of my car? You're not in any trouble, okay? I'm not going to be putting handcuffs on you. You obviously don't have any weapons. I'm going to get you into the air conditioning, let you take a breath, relax a little bit, and then I'll come back and talk to you in a few minutes, okay?
Okay, a couple points here. What the officer is trying to do is trying to create some sight and sound separation between the two parties, and we'll explain why that is and why that's necessary. Another thing that he's trying to do by doing this is, as he said, try to give her an opportunity to bring her emotions down. And in most cases, when there's not trouble, that would actually work. I mean, if you've ever been pulled over by a law enforcement officer, everyone gets nervous. But after a moment, that nervousness starts to go down when there's not any problems. You're going to see through these other videos that her anxiety level and her stress remains high the entire time, and there's not any diminishing of those. It either stays the same or actually gets worse. Another thing I want to point out is, even though the officer is sitting her in the car and it seems to have tinted windows, when they get Brian out of the car, he is going to be standing at the rear of their van, which is still in a visual with the patrol car. Whether he can see her or not, the issue is that if she can see him, he can send her body language messages or messages with his eyes that tell her everything he wants to know. She knows what his body postures and eye movements mean. And so ideally, I would have wanted to see a much, much better method of separation. This is partly why we need sight and sound separation. Now, the next part is this coded language. We're going to watch Brian first, and we're going to review parts of his video as well.
Tell me what's going on.
She just gets worked up sometimes, and I try and really distance myself from her. So, like, I locked the car and I walked away from her. What happened this morning is that she's trying to start up like her own little website blog and everything. So I give her time. We really had a nice morning, if anything, but she just got worked up because we were trying to get going and get our day going.
Because he's already laying out this idea that Gabby's the problem, that he's tried to distance himself, that she gets worked up, and we see him trying to build a foundation that, again, that there's nothing wrong, but if there is something wrong, it's got to be her.
You want to go like arches before the stuff like that.
Okay. You want to tell me about those scratches on your face?
She had her cell phone in her hand. That's why I was pushing her away. Because she wanted me. I like to walk away. I said, let's just take a breather and let's not go anywhere. Let's just calm down for a minute.
So the officer has picked up on some injuries on his face, and he related that to being caused by her cell phone, and that he was, trying to push and walk away from the encounter. But I want you to pay attention to the fact that there were injuries on his face.
And then she had her phone trying to get the keys from me, so I got away. I was just trying to. I know I shouldn't push, but I was just trying to push her away to go. Let's just take a minute, step back, and breathe. And she got me.
Can I see your hand? Oh, you got a mark right.
Oh, that's from a wire.
So the officer has now picked up on there's actually two marks on the top of his hand, and he has explained that away as, oh, that was, caused by a wire. Just keep that in your brain for right now.
Yeah.
You want to tell me about hitting that curb?
Hitting the curb was her grabbing the wheel. She said, I can't believe we're getting pulled over in this.
What about the speed? Did she take over the?
No, I
take
saw
over the pedal on you?
if I was going fast, I'm sorry. No, it's probably just the moment of like, I'm still shaking now. The adrenaline, seeing the lights flashing up, and then her gripping the wheel.
So a couple things he's related to is he has stated that Gabby grabbed the wheel of the car, and that's why he hit the curb. And he's also tried to explain away the speed. Well, he's the one controlling the accelerator, so if the car's moving fast, it wasn't caused by her. But he started to again put some a narrative in here that's not exactly true. We'll see a little bit later.
So if I sped up, I'm sorry about that. Or if I was speeding beforehand, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, it took quite a bit to catch up to you. So, yeah.
I'm sorry about that. We're just going into the park again to get water because we have a 6-gallon water container to fill up. So we're just grabbing water for the hike. Okay. And I was trying to keep everything calm and quiet because there's plans still to go for our hike. I'm really sorry about that.
So in the last 30 seconds, he said, "I'm sorry" 4 times. Now, again, people can be sorry, but he's doing what they call overkill. The overly apologetic person generally is someone that as a law enforcement officer, I would look at as being a bit suspicious. He's just laid it on too thick, as many of y'all have heard that term before. Now we're going to jump over to a portion with Gabby.
Who's driving? Someone said he hit a curb.
I
While you're driving?
uh,
While he was driving, you were hitting him?
not a lot. Probably like, come on, I like kind of like.
Did you already tell him all this?
Okay, the silence that you heard there was just a redaction of some audio because it was some personal identifying information. You may not have been able to hear the officer, but the officer said, "Did you hit him?" That is a very low. That's a leading close into question, which is not good. She did relate that she did hit him, but the reason it's a bad question is because we don't understand the why or the how she hit him. The why she hit him is something that is unknown to us right now. But again, the question was a really bad question.
I didn't get that far into
Okay,
it.
so
She was hyperventilating
She's
a
saying
little
that
bit.
they don't drink, but at the point when you lit them up,
You don't drink or anything.
She started hitting him.
Yeah, I was yelling at him, and then when you turned your lights on, I like kind of punched his arm like this. Just an
that
idiot.
she's saying was like hit the curb. You said it was Gabby? I'm sorry, I'm really bad. It was Gabby?
So again, she is. You see her emotions start to take over again. Again, we would expect for her to come down to some degree, but she really hasn't. Um, the last part of this slide is some body posturing, what I call blocking or protective stances that we're going to see from Brian.
I've got this gentleman here. Yeah. This gentleman noticed that you have some marks on your neck. Yeah.
Okay, the officer that you see on the right has noted that he's now seen marks on Brian's neck. Again, keep that in mind.
And she's got some marks on her too. We're just trying to figure out what all happened. And I know you probably already told your story. This officer's probably going to be the one handling the whole case. Do you want to listen to what he has to say? And yeah, so then you tell him what happened. If you don't mind.
Start at the beginning for me.
Start at the beginning. Well, I don't want to go too far back, but we've been in BLM land for the past week or so, traveling around, and the flies here are like pretty intense. So the flies have definitely been getting to her, and then my feet are dirty and everything. So I think that our little.
So the officer told Brian to start from the beginning. Brian knows that what they're talking about is back in front of the store, but he's talking about flies in the area and his feet being dirty. I mean, he literally is like ready to go back to his time of birth to misdirect the officer. And in the time coming up, I want you to see his laughing and jovial nature and the position of his arms and hands while he's talking to the officer.
Squabble started because we were hanging out at the coffee shop, and when I got back to the van, there was some dirt and stuff again, and I moved our food around as a result of this, so she gets a little.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Do you need any water?
That's okay.
It's hot out.
We were going to get water because we ran out, but it's okay. No, it's all right. I don't like classic problems. Okay. Thank you. we just had a little disagreement there. And the disagreement was just that she was getting a little worked up, and I was saying, "No, it's okay. Thank you so much."
It's not his fault. That's good.
So it was just more of a disagreement, and I just wanted to.
What was the disagreement about?
It was. I wouldn't even call it disagreement. It was just that I'm dirty and I can't change being dirty. Like I got dirty feet, I got sand in my flip flops and stuff like that. It was that we were at the coffee shop for so long because we were there from 9 to 3. So yeah, there's a few little things, little.
So he's talking about, again, his dirty feet again. It's all these little tiny things, but essentially it's no big deal. He's standing in what I call the fig leaf position. It's two things. One, it's a blocking motion psychologically, that he's putting a barrier between him and the officers. I don't think he believes that they're going to jump on him, but it's a psychological thing. The other thing he's doing is he's trying to display that he's not a threat. He likely knows that a lot of arm movement and a lot of spontaneous movements are going to be a bit threatening and come off as a bit aggressive. So he's trying to make himself appear as meek as possible.
Relationship. I don't feel a relationship.
I've been married for over 5 years now. So.
There's a lot of little things.
Yeah, I can go.
And
I get it.
We really we weren't physical before the point where I said, all right, let's just take a breather and like walk away for a minute. And I'll go for a walk this way, and you can go walk that way on the block. You know, there's that move.
So I did want to add real quick, the reason that I've got this picture on here of Brian and Gabby is during their time together, they were actually in Charleston, South Carolina. That's the Pineapple Fountain in Charleston. So the fact of the matter is this incident could have occurred in South Carolina, and with the right insight and the right training, the outcome could have been different. We got two more video clips we're going to take a look at. One is some inconsistency. Remember that Brian said that Gabby grabbed the wheel when the officers were attempting to pull them over. Take a listen.
You've heard everything now from.
Quick question. You said you were hitting him in the arm. Did you grab the steering wheel?
No, I didn't.
You did not touch
I
the
didn't
steering
touch
wheel?
the steering wheel, but only for like a second because I just saw the lights come on and it was more just like doing it, like, you know.
But did you grab the steering wheel and like swerve or anything like that?
I didn't touch the steering wheel at all.
So we have a very clear inconsistency, and we're going to finish up with these last subtle clues.
Bravo, Romeo, India, Alpha, November.
And then what? And his reaction was to do what?
It's gonna be out of Florida.
Okay, so what she's getting ready to do is she's getting ready to not just talk about, but the fact that she demonstrates how Brian grabbed her face is really, really important.
Did he hit you though? I mean, it's okay if you're saying you hit him, but then I understand if he hit you, but we want to know the truth. Did he actually hit you? Because, you know, where did he hit you? Don't worry. Be honest. So has he been drinking?
Okay, so what she related to there was a face grab. Why is this important? There were marks on Brian's face, there were marks on his neck, and there were marks on the top of a hand. That is consistent with someone who was being assaulted, and the closest thing that they could do with the position that they were in was to go for that person's face. So my belief is that she tried to remove his hand from her, and in the process of doing that, injured the top of his hand. If you can think about his hand being on her face and neck, and then his face and neck being the point that she has to target to get him to back off. And so, again, these subtleties are subtle, but again, with awareness and training, we can pick up on these. Some key points is that the safe environment created by the police wasn't enough to break down the learned helplessness of the moment. She's been through a pattern with him, and what you saw was in some way a conditioned and learned response by her. It wasn't something that was natural to her probably before they got together. And Lauren, you got some comments as well.
Well, and the side of the highway, and I believe that that officer thought he was, separating them and keeping her safe. However, having her on the side of the interstate, all of that overstimulation from all of the peripheral activity going on, not to mention those of y'all that have been on like a crash scene, people slow down and start to look and see what's going on. So that just feeds into, as a victim, that feeds into her fear that even going by at 80 miles an hour, those individuals know what's going on with her. They know why she's being questioned by the police. They know it's almost like she's got a scarlet A on her chest. And that's why when we have domestic violence or sexual assault patients, we don't want them in our ERs for too long, because they believe that everybody around them, even without knowing them, knows what's going on and why they're there. So getting her into the car immediately would have been, from my perspective, the better of the two options. It just would have helped give her a quieter environment, because at this point, a lot of her trauma hormones are still going through her body. Her adrenaline is feeding into part of the reason why she's hyperventilating. And getting her into a calmer, quieter scenario would have helped sort of keep her more centrally focused. I did notice, and I didn't notice it last night, Brian, but in the first video when they're talking to her, I forgot what she disclosed, but she did kind of put her head down and her hand like this, like in between her and Brian. So it was almost like she was just taking an extra step to keep him from being able to figure out or see what she was disclosing. So yeah, so keeping her out in public view on the side of the highway was definitely a trigger for her fear that people outside of the situation were able to just look at her and tell. So it was definitely an embarrassing for her and enraging for him, because as far as I know, other than some controlling behaviors that her friends had noticed, there hadn't really been any clear indicators of any type of an abusive relationship between the two prior to this. So he had been this amount of time without getting caught, if you want to say it that way. And now here it is. They're on the side of the road with all these law enforcement officers around them, questioning him and asking about injuries. So now it's triggered in his head that the cracks are showing, and people are being able to pick up on what's going on. And so I'm sure when she got back in that car, there was a lot of anger emanating from him towards her.
Yeah. And as Sam mentioned at the beginning, as chaplains, many of y'all have gone through the CISM training, and you know that this separation of these parties is one of those training techniques. So remember, tap into the stuff that you've already known before today, but you see that a lot of the things that you knew as a chaplain in the public safety area is some of the same stuff that we see as well. So I love the fact that we overlap in these areas with these understandings. So trauma and communication can be a big problem when it comes to these type of situations. And there's this neurological barrier that is created that is a lot of times outside the control of the abused person. And it truly inhibits their ability to tell us things and tell us things in the right way. As a law enforcement officer, we love logical, linear stories, but rarely do we ever get that. We have to kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together. And sight and sound separation for us helps us to get helps us the opportunity to have more consistency or inconsistent, pick up on those things. What are things matching up? What are things not matching up? But Lauren's got some really interesting insight on how the brain works. And tell us what you know, Lauren.
So this is my favorite thing to talk about. So get ready. I love talking about the neurobiology of trauma. So our brains are hardwired to react in a very specific manner. It is an autonomic process. Once our fear circuitry is engaged, once we are faced with whether it be a threat, a physical endangerment, something that's not in the ordinary, our fear circuitry will be initiated by our amygdala. That is a small part of our brain that sort of regulates our fear, our anxiety, and our anger. And it's basically our alarm. So when the amygdala triggers the alarm, it sets in motion the fear circuitry. And part of that fear circuitry is that our prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain that allows us to make decisions, that it's our logical brain. We use it to do like the pros versus cons. That, I like to say, that part of our brain takes a smoke break out back. Because when we're faced with a dangerous situation, we don't have the time to make pro versus cons list to decide how we're going to handle it. It has to be a split second decision, and our brain is already wired on what decision it's going to cause us to present, like how we're going to react. So the prefrontal cortex is out back taking a break. Also our hippocampus, which I call that our the camera of our brain. It's what makes our memories. It records things chronologically, snapshots of our everyday, and records that into our memory so that when we recount it, we can go from A to B to C in a linear fashion. When our fear circuitry kicks in, the hippocampus goes into just central details. It is in survivor mode. It is only paying attention to the details necessary to survive whatever the person is facing. The peripheral details outside that it would normally pick up, they are not being paid attention to. So most of these central details that the patient or the victim will be able to pay attention to and hold on to are more sensory in nature. So things like smells, touches, what they hear. So when law enforcement gets to a victim on scene and starts asking the questions that are necessary for their investigation, those may be asking for answers that deal with the peripheral details that didn't really matter in the moment for survival. So that's when, like a kidnapping victim, they're not going to be able to tell you what color shirt the assailant had on, what color was the car they were put in, what streets did they go down, but they can describe to you what the trunk felt like, if it had a felt lining, if it smelled, sounds that they heard. Did it sound like they were driving over gravel? Did they hear trains, planes, boats from a nearby port? They can describe those things, those sensory things that they could touch, that they could smell, that they could hear, more so than descriptive things like, the streets and the description of the assailant. So that's why a lot of times when these patients are questioned immediately after an incident, there's going to be gaps. There's going to be limited recall because what's being asked might be a peripheral detail that was not concentrated on at the time. Now, a few days later, when their brain has gone back out of its survivor or trauma mode and back to normal operations, they might have flashes. They might remember those things and can then add. But then that leads to the whole concept of, well, their story changed. And it's not that their story changed, it's that those peripheral details were finally brought back into the picture and remembered. So now we've got our alarm has gone off, our fear circuitry has been activated, the prefrontal cortex is on cigarette number 3 out back, and the hippocampus is now just paying attention to the central details necessary. The next part of the process is the HPA axis, and that involves our hypothalamus, our pituitary glands, and our adrenal glands. And what these do is what we call in the medical field, they provide a bolus of 4 specific hormones, kind of a shock and awe, if you will. And they secrete large amounts of opioids, oxytocin, adrenaline, and then cortisol, which is a steroid, a steroid that will help with energy duration. So the opioids and the oxytocin will help the victim get through whatever pain they may experience. And if any of y'all have had surgery and been given Percocet afterwards, you don't really feel the pain. You don't feel a whole lot, and it can change your affect. So you might have just a flat affect and you're just there and you're just kind of staring off into space. So if the ratio of opioids and oxytocin are off in these victims and they've gotten more opioids secreted through their system, immediately after the incident and on the scene, they may have that flat affect. They may just be monotone. They may not be really reactive to a whole lot. Now, the oxytocin is the feel-good hormone. And that also helps these victims get through the pain, because if there's a lot of oxytocin in their system, they're feeling too good to feel the pain. So if that is out of ratio and the body secreted more oxytocin, then on the scene, they may be giggling, they may be smiling. And it might just seem off. Like, why are they laughing when they just experienced this horrific act of violence? That's why those hormones are still circulating for a good while afterwards. So, like when she got into the car and you talked about how her anxiety, it was expected the anxiety would start to lower. The adrenaline is still sort of feeding that hyperventilation, and it's also feeding the anxiety. So it probably took a while for that anxiety to finally start to lower while she was with them. And the adrenaline gets secreted to, if the brain's going to make this body move, that's what the adrenaline is for. It's going to get them moving. The adrenaline is why you hear about, a 4'11" mom who's able to lift the four-door sedan to get it off of her 2-year-old toddler. And then the other secretion is the cortisol, and that is allowing that energy to last a while. So, a good example of this would be all of the individuals in downtown New York when the World Trade Center began to fall, and they just took off running. And those that made it to Central Park and farther to Harlem, that cortisol that was secreting along with their adrenaline kept them moving at a longer distance than what they normally would have been able to do. So all four of those hormones work together to enable the victim to do whatever the response is hardwired into their brain to be. And normally those are fight, flight, freeze, or appease. And we can all sit here and we can say, well, if I were faced with this, this is what I would do. And the reality is, if you get into that situation, your brain may have other plans. Your brain, in a split second through the fear circuitry, can say, well, you're not moving because you're not going to outrun them, or you're not going to do this because it's just going to get you hurt worse. So questioning the patient or the victim as to why they didn't do this or why they didn't do that, they didn't have any control over their response. So that's how the fear circuitry and the neurobiology of trauma helps these individuals survive whatever violent act they've survived, whether it be a physical assault, whether it be even, a verbal assault. It still triggers that fear circuitry because it's not an ordinary activity that they should be experiencing. So their amygdala says, nope, this is not good. Let's go into our survivor mode, and this is what we're going to do. So again, we've got hormones that are affecting how they're presenting. We've got the hippocampus that's, only taking pictures of specific details to help them survive. So they're not really able to answer a lot of the questions that they're being asked because it might be about peripheral details that weren't necessary for the survival. And they may be presenting like they're laughing, or they may just be, sort of staring off into space because, again, all of those hormones that have been going through their system. And then if you add into that, if strangulation was involved, you've got a lack of oxygen for a certain amount of time, and that can also affect their memory recall. So that can also affect how they're able to answer some of the questions that they're being asked on the scene. So understanding how all of that fits together into the picture can help you when you're on scene listening to these patients and these victims answering questions and seeing how they're presenting and noticing their behavior and understanding that these inconsistencies are not necessarily indicative of a lie or a made up story. It's just what they're still having to contend with while they're in survival mode. And typically it takes, based on studies, it takes about 3 complete sleep cycles for the brain to go back into its normal operating mode. And that's actually based on studies that have been done on law enforcement officers that fired their gun in the line of duty. So they did all of this research, and they found that 3 complete sleep cycles allows the brain to completely come out of that survivor mode. The hippocampus then goes back into normal acting or normal functioning, and the prefrontal cortex comes back online and goes back into normal functioning. So keeping in mind all of that, it kind of helps you get a better idea of why your victim is presenting a way, and it kind of helps you see little things that you might not have noticed before or you may have misinterpreted before.
Yeah. And in your role as a chaplain, being probably one of the most trusted individuals that victims could deal with, now you understand where you still might get some hesitancy. We as law enforcement officers got hesitancy all the time from victims for completely different reasons. But again, with what Lauren has described, you may get that as well for those same reasons. When you do have to talk to these victims, or you want to, or you have to, remember you're not in an investigative role. But if you have questions, please try to make sure that they're open-ended and non-leading. Don't suggest an answer. Don't lock things down to a yes or no, because it truly, as a chaplain wanting to serve somebody, you need detail in order to know what you can provide. And so the more opportunity you have to exercise open-ended questions, generally the more information that you'll get. So questions that you might want to start with is, can you tell me about it? Can you tell me about, or what can you tell me about, instead of why did something happen? They may or may not know why, and even if they do, it may not get you what you want. One of my favorite questions is, what if anything? What if anything did you see? What if anything did you do? What if anything can I do for you? Again, it doesn't suggest anything did or did not happen, but it truly is opening the door for them to provide what they want to relate or say. Another question that I forgot to put on here is there anything that you would like to tell me that I did not ask you about? Sometimes that's a good closing question for anything that you might have missed that wasn't specific enough. Lauren, you got a couple more questions as well.
Well, tell me more about. That's one of our favorite ones, especially whenever we're working with our pediatric patients. Tell me more. That will open up a lot. And when you brought up, is there anything else that you want to tell me? I like to ask, is there anything else you think I should know? A lot of times that will elicit some information that did not fall within anything I had asked before. That can be a very enlightening question. And we avoid why, not necessarily, well, because sometimes it won't get us the response that, or the information that we need. But also, if you think about it, why is it's just, it's human nature for us to ask the question why. But if you think about when you're asked why, a lot of times it's, the expectation is for you to defend a choice that you made. And so, why did you do this? Why this or why that? So, a lot of times asking why can put our patients on the defensive, because it's implying that they made a choice and this was the result of their choice. And so, in a sense, it's victim blaming. Sometimes there are certain questions that you cannot get around asking why. It's just the only, or the best way to ask the question to elicit the information that you're trying to elicit. So if that comes up, explain why you're about to ask it, what the purpose of the question is. We run into that a lot with our patients. And so we preface it with, I just need to get this information about this, or this. So my question is not to, blame you or put you on the defensive. It's just to help me garner this particular set of information that I need for my report. And then again, remember that if they have experienced strangulation, and strangulation is a form of a traumatic brain injury, and during strangulation, deeper train, I cannot speak today. In the line of strangulation, a patient can also experience another traumatic brain injury in the form of, if they're being shaken, if their head is being hit against something. So the traumatic brain tissue death from the strangulation, along with the actual, contact, those two can affect their memory. So if they have had that happen during the incident and you're talking to them afterwards, just keep in mind that they might not be able to answer some of your questions because of the after effects of that strangulation or that brain injury.
Mhm. Yeah. So remember, again, in your role as a chaplain, if you can, do everything you can to create a place or environment of safety. Because if the victim doesn't feel comfortable, they won't speak. And the one thing that they're more certain of than anything else is that the abuser is likely going to retaliate in some way, or there's going to be some type of reprisal after everyone leaves. And so that's more front in their mind. But if you, at least in the moment, can provide that structure of safety, that might be the only opportunity for a window of disclosure or discovery to happen. So you are absolutely critical to these type of situations. Some patterns that you may see uh, is a baseline shift. You may or may not have had a history with the individuals that you're going to interact with. However, I mean, frequency and contact considerations has to be mentioned. Many of you live and work in the areas, in both those areas. You live and work in the same area, and you've come to know a lot of your parishioners. You've come to know a lot of people around town, and so your level of contact and your frequency of contact may be able to give you a baseline on what someone's normal is. And so you might have the ability to pick up on what is abnormal because of that prior knowledge and prior experience. And Lauren, you got some comments about abusers and the vulnerable.
Well, and I was going to say, if this is someone that you don't have any knowledge about previous to your initial interaction with them, you can always just say, describe or tell me about your life before you two met. If they describe a life filled with, trips and this, a successful job, or they've got a lot of friendships and such, and now all of a sudden you're able to see that there's a great level of control and they're not able to do a lot of things anymore, then that definitely can give you an idea of what their baseline was prior to this. Abusers are like traffickers. They seek out the vulnerable. They are experts at being able to pick out a vulnerable person in a crowd and being able to play on those vulnerabilities in order to be their savior. And that just helps reel them into that relationship. But they can spot a vulnerable person at 10 feet easily and pick up on the vulnerabilities that they can play on in order to, like I said, be the hero to that individual, which just, they're able to be the father figure that they didn't have, or, be the romantic that they've never experienced in a relationship before. They're able to be all of the things that that person has been missing in their life that has made them vulnerable.
Yeah, these predators, these abusive predators, they have learned over time through relationships how to perfect their craft of identifying the vulnerable. And I use this lion zebra analogy. Lions are predators, and when they are out there hunting for the zebra or whatever animal you want to choose, they're not picking the biggest, the strongest zebra. They're not picking the one that's surrounded by a huge network of other zebras who also all have their heightened awareness and are looking and watching. What they're doing, what these lions are doing, is they are looking for people that are the zebras that are isolated, the ones who have their head in the grass and aren't paying attention and looking around. They're looking for any type of infirmities or disabilities, whether it's emotional, physical, or otherwise. And so these abusers, in many ways, are just like the predators of lions versus the zebra characteristics of what you see on a National Geographic episode. They truly are conditioned and have trained themselves to do that. Uh, fast moving, looking for a fast moving and a quick uh, committed relationship is what I call getting the emotional hooks in. Abusers understand that if they get the emotional connection early, then it's much harder to break. Just about everyone that I know, even if they've never been involved in a domestic violence situation, probably can say that they were in a relationship for much longer than they should have been, even if there was no abuse. And when people are honest with themselves, the reason is because emotionally, that was the hardest thing to break. Even when there were maybe other choices or other people or other possibilities, the emotional connections were really hard. Well, that is one thing that the abusers count on, is connecting emotionally, because those emotional connections, if broken, are also the ones more quickly reconnected, even when it's not in the interest of the abused person to do so. Emotionally, they're acting against what is best for them because of the emotional connections. And Lauren, you've got some funny terminology related to this type of commitment.
Well, we see a lot of love bombing when these fast commitment or these fast moving commitment relationships begin. And that serves the abuser twofold. One, it, like you said, it sinks their hooks into the victim, the patient, and it reels them into the relationship. You know, they're getting showered with love and gifts and affection and what have you. Well, then down the line, once the cycle of abuse starts, and there's four periods within the cycle. There's the tension phase, which is when the patient's walking on eggshells, waiting for the shoe to drop. Then there's the explosion, and that can be physical or verbal. And then there's the remorse stage where the abuser is apologetic. And then there's the honeymoon phase. During the honeymoon phase, they go back to that love bombing. They know that it reeled them in the first time, and there's a risk that this victim is going to walk away now after the explosion. And if the remorse hasn't worked, they go back into that love bombing, and they shower them with all of the affection and all of the love and the gifts that they showered them with at the beginning, and they resync their hooks back into them and bring them back in. And so that completes that cycle of abuse. That love bombing gets them in the first place and keeps bringing them back in every time they try to leave.
Yeah. And if you think about it, when you meet someone for the first time, if they showed up at your house and punched you in the face on the first date, you wouldn't go out with them again, more than likely. But that's why the emotional part of the connections is what people remember. That's what they go back to. Oh, well, he or she was, loving and caring. And again, that emotional connection brings people back. You'll also see self-blaming statements. You saw this in the Gabby Petito case. Essentially, she was saying it was my fault. I should have known better. I was, argumentative, or I was, causing him some problems. We'll see the self-blaming statements. We'll see this disparity in injuries. And again, this couldn't have been more clear, or as an example, than the Gabby Petito case. I think she had one bruise or one mark that they had observed in the entirety of the event that was on one of her arms. But of all the injuries that they saw, the most noted were the ones on Brian: his face, his neck, and the top of his hands. And, under law, victims can act preemptively in a physical way to defend themselves either from an actual action or the belief that some type of harm was going to come to them. They don't have to wait to get hurt. And so in days gone by where law enforcement, we just looked at injuries, and whoever had the most injuries is likely the victim. Well, that wasn't good training back then. That's the training that I had 26 years ago. I was like, oh, well, who has the most injuries? Well, sometimes the most injuries and the worst injuries are actually on the abuser, not the one who's actually been abused. And with the strangulation disclosures that come out, again, we see this uh, examples of injuries to the head, face, hands, and forearms. So we're looking at this change in personality between the abuser and the abused when they're around each other. Lauren, do you have any comments on that?
Well, I think you pointed it out, especially once they separated Gabby initially. You even pointed out, look at the change in her posture. Like you could see she kind of opened up a little bit more once she got that distance away from Brian. Um, but yeah, the injuries that we see, or that we might see with a strangulation disclosure, like I said, the scratches to the victim's own neck from where they were trying to get the hands away. There might be half moon marks on the abuser's hand from where they were digging in with their fingernails trying to pull their hands away, or scratches on their forearms. And like you said, they may have gone for the face. If they're coming from behind with a chokehold, that might be the only thing they can get their hands on, is scratching the face. So it's, like you said, 26 years ago, y'all were trained the person that has the most injuries is the victim. But if you have the training or you have the knowledge, you're able to kind of put the pieces together of, well, she's saying this and he's got these marks, and that's kind of consistent with what she's saying happened. So just knowing that it's not just what you see initially, you have to kind of put those two together and start to see, is that picture starting to come together based on what you're seeing and what you're being told.
Yeah. And let me apologize for what I'm getting ready to say. I should have said this sooner. We've basically been talking about a heterosexual type of relationship between men and women. But of course, we know that there are same-sex relationships out there.
Mhm.
What we're talking about today applies in those situations as well. Um, with the patterns, the coercion, the control, the body postures, it happens in those type of relationships the exact same way. So it can be
Mhm.
applied to many type of intimate partner violence situations. Again, as a chaplain, you have great influence and you're in a great position to not be an aggressive type of person. And what I mean by that is a law enforcement officer standing in a uniform, just by visual, that's one of our forms of initial control is our visual appearance. Well, you as a chaplain, again, having that, generational and societal mantle of trust and being in a non-law enforcement type of uniform, you have a great influence to empower and give advice that might be listened to better, quite frankly, than a law enforcement officer and perhaps more than even a clinician. So try to avoid any type of criticism. You know now that abusers don't pick victims. Excuse me, victims don't pick abusers. Abusers pick victims. So we definitely need to avoid any type of victim blaming. And when you are giving advice, that's great, but without knowing do they actually have the resources to follow up on it is kind of a moot point. And so looking into that a little bit deeper as to what resources you can provide, which we're going to kind of talk about at the end, is really important. And also provide some level of choice or options or input. Make it where the victim of the abuse has some ability to voice their concerns, um, and any options or input that they have. Lauren, you got some thoughts on this?
Well, when you talk about that second one, the can they test, do they have the resources in order to leave the relationship or escape? In addition to that, if it's determined no, they don't have the resources, then the next question might want to be, will they take the resources that you're able to provide them, whether it be, local government resources, a shelter or a rape crisis center shelter, that kind of thing. We have had, I have had patients that have had experience with some of our resources that we're able to offer in the form of shelters or, indigent programs where our hospital or our rape crisis center are able to get our patients into hotels at either a very discounted rate or no charge at all. But the patients that have had experience with shelters just are adamant. They're like, no, I'm not going back there. I don't feel safe there. And then as much as I love that we're able to offer hotel rooms for some of these patients, they're in hotels that are notoriously investigated for human trafficking and drug. So it's not the safest place, in my opinion, to put them. So when you have a patient or a victim who doesn't have the resources, try to be knowledgeable about the resources, try to learn about your resources that are available that can be offered for these patients and these victims, and be prepared that sometimes you may encounter a victim who is just adamant, no, I would rather go back and be in the house with my abuser than go to that shelter or go stay at that hotel. And that's a really discouraging place for us to end up with our patients, because we want to get them in a safe space. In just our particular area, our resources are unfortunately somewhat limited and not as safe as some of us with inside knowledge believe them to be. So we sometimes we have to think outside the box, and we have to find other ways to get them someplace safe if they in fact do want to get out of the relationship. And sometimes they just, even if they have the resources, they might not want to leave. Maybe as abusive as the relationship is, what they were in before may have been worse. And we see that with trafficking victims too, that the existence that they're in now is actually better than the existence that they came from. And some of our patients are just, they're willing to just suck it up and endure the continued abuse because that might be the safest place that they've been in terms of a roof over their head or what have you. So figuring out if they've got the resources to leave, and then figuring out, will they will they utilize those resources if they're available?
Yeah. Also keep in mind that the resources that are available are ideally for those who are the targets of abuse, not the
Mhm.
abuser. And this is something that some of y'all may or may not be aware of, but in the Gabby Petito case, it was actually Brian who was given a hotel, and that had really upset a lot of people. But it's because the officers incorrectly saw Gabby as the aggressor. So she was actually given the van and able to drive off because they had been living in the van. That was basically like a mobile hotel or place of safety where she could drive, anywhere she wanted to. Brian was actually put into a hotel. Um, so that's really upset a lot of people. So again, ideally, it's not that we don't want to help people, but let's give the help to the person that truly, truly needs it. Unfortunately, Brian and Gabby communicated over phone, even though the officers advised not to, and she actually went and picked him up, and they got back together. Um, um, Again, a victim acting against her own interest. But again, I understand why she did it, and that's a discussion for a different day. But um, anyway, as we move on, just remember the old adage: if we can lead a horse to water, but we can't make them drink. Well, when we try to shove services on people, um, they're not always going to take it. So one of the better approaches is let them lead you on what they need rather than perhaps pushing what you think they need. Get that input from them, listen to their choices, and see how you can accommodate that. As we get close to the wrap up here, I want everyone to be aware of this silent gesture, this I need help or there's danger gesture. This is something that you can teach somebody very easily. Essentially, it's again open palm, tuck the thumb, and fold the four fingers over. This is used in many, many different types of interpersonal. This is used in human trafficking, child abuse, domestic violence. But it's an easy way for people in a public venue or in a public way to not be discovered that they need help. And I'll show you this real quick cell phone video that's just available on the internet.
I know your mom is a great baker, so I should be good.
The trick is to grease the pan really well and use overripe spice.
I appreciate it.
So not everyone is familiar with this. We obviously don't want to share this with our abusers out there. But again, as you interact with people and as you feel led to that this might be helpful, certainly share this non-verbal communication that, as you see here, can be used over social media as well, or as over the phone.
I know you.
So as we close here, let's look at some resources. Just in summary, we hope that you're able to see more subtle things that you weren't aware of before. We hope that you're also able to pick up on the coded language, both the oral language and the body language that people may tend to express. And we also just want to reemphasize, we know that you already do respect the trauma, but now hopefully having a more deeper insight into why victims may respond the way that they do, but that doesn't make sense to everyone else. Being able to see kind of inside their thought processes and their reasons for disclosure, non-disclosure, or changing things up. And Lauren, I'll let you take hitting up our resources, and then we'll get ready to wrap up.
So we have statewide resources. Whatever region you are in, there's some type of resource that you can always reach out to if you encounter a patient and you're just not quite sure what other resources you can offer. So the South Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, that's their website there. And then we have the South Carolina Victims Assistance Network. And SC Van actually has a program for domestic violence survivors. If they seek medical assistance from like a forensic nurse examiner program, they can fill out some paperwork that can then be submitted to SC Van, and SC Van will reimburse them for out of pocket costs for medical, for some other things. And it's very clear in the application what specific things are not covered, but it helps these patients, especially those that have limited to no resources, it helps them with any out-of-pocket costs that they needed to expend in order to get out of the situation, get medical treatment, and so on and so forth. And Brian, if you'll switch to the next one for me.
Yeah, let me just add real quick about
Okay.
SC Van as well. So, and this, what I'm going to tell you has to be done through a law enforcement representative. The South Carolina Victim Assistance Network has the availability through private and grant funding to put victims of crime into hotels or motels as an option to a domestic violence shelter, because we got 46 counties in South Carolina, but only about 12 domestic violence shelters. So there's a huge gap there. SC Van 24 hours a day, 7 days a week can arrange that. They have a system set up where they can get these vouchers for people to stay at hotels and motels, but it has to go through a law enforcement officer or a law enforcement victim advocate because of the necessary paperwork that needs to be filled out with an incident report. Doesn't necessarily mean there has to be an arrest, but there generally has to be an incident report that has to be put on file along with this. So just want to keep that in mind. It's again 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
And I will add, crisis centers, like our local crisis center, they have a relationship with SC Van, and they will go to SC Van to help get patients into hotels. They've utilized SC Van to get a patient on a bus to Kentucky to a safe family member before. So SC Van is a really good resource for helping those patients that have limited to no resources in order to get into a safe place. These here are some forensic nurse examiner programs in the state. So if you are in the upstate, you can suggest to a patient, or you can have law enforcement refer a patient to either any of the Prisma hospitals in the upstate area. They have their program that's headed up by Ellen Kennedy. And those individuals, those forensic nurses actually are mobile. They will go to any of the locations to, Lawrence, Greenville, Simpsonville, easily. And then Spartanburg Regional has a program as well. So if you're closer to the Spartanburg Union area, you can suggest that a patient go there to, especially our patients that have experienced a strangulation. We definitely want to get them some medical care as soon as possible. If you're in the Midlands area, again, any of the Prisma locations, Gina Dyer-Goss heads up their program. And any patients in the PD, if that's where you're located, they can come to McLeod, any McLeod facility. And like I mentioned earlier, if they come to the one in Florence, they'll see me or my cohorts. If they go to any of the ones in Horry County, they can then be discharged and sent to the Carolina Forest one for a physical exam. If they're in Cheraw, Clarendon, or Dillon, especially, this is really helpful for our patients that don't have the ability or the transportation to get to another hospital. So this has been really vital for our smaller communities. They are able to get the same exam and forensic report done and forensic photography via a telesane program that's just done a lot of really good work for those three outliers. And then if you are in the low country, MUSC has their program. I'm not familiar if you have to send the patient to the primary MUSC hospital or to any of their outliers. Now, the MUSCs that are located in Marion and Florence, those would actually come to us at McLeod, and we have a working relationship with them. They refer patients to us frequently. So if you are on the scene with a patient that requires some type of medical care, and maybe the responding officers don't quite know where to send them, you can speak up and say, hey, they can go to MUSC, and Jeanette Ward oversees that program. There's one of them, the 792-1414 number there for MUSC. That is the main MUSC number. I could not find a direct contact for Jeanette. All of the other ones, that's their direct phones. But 792-1414 will get you to the main hospital, and you just tell the patient, or if you need to make the call for the patient, request that the switchboard or operator get you in touch with the forensic nurse that's on call, and they'll be able to patch you through. And those
And again,
forensic nurses.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, we're resources not just for the medical aspect, but we can also help these patients line up with other resources like the crisis center, like a victim's advocate, like case management, social work, DSS if children are involved. So that's sort of in addition to the medical part, we kind of also help coordinate a lot of the other exterior resource availability and connection with these patients.
Also, as chaplains, I don't want you to forget, even though we gave you this list here, you may be aware of resources in your area that are specific to your region that are either faith-based or other nonprofit organizations. And so I always encourage our law enforcement officers, our public safety officials, and obviously you, see what is in your area that is beyond what we've been able to offer, because we do have pockets around South Carolina that are essentially serviced better than others. But sometimes there's some programs that many people don't know about, but that can still be tapped into and be resourceful for you. So this is the contact information for Lauren there if you want to reach out to her for any more information or questions. And this is my information as well with the my LinkedIn QR code. Those telephone numbers and emails are the best ways to get in touch with us as we end today. So we want to thank you for your time and attention. Be blessed and be safe.
Thank you guys so much.